Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Ben Brockmueller. Organic farming is a rich and rewarding challenge for farmers, but without the use of herbicides and other conventional methods, weed suppression can be a problem. Cover crops that form a living mulch may be one way to overcome this challenge, but what works in one crop may not necessarily work in another. In this episode, Ben joins me to discuss cover crop management in corn as a means of weed suppression. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Ben Brockmueller with us. Ben is a researcher working in the Organic and Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab led by Dr. Aaron Silva at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A native of South Dakota, he received his bachelor's degree in plant science from Dordt University and obtained a master's degree in agronomy from South Dakota State University. Currently, his research interests are on developing cropping systems that can minimize tillage in organic agriculture. Hello, Ben. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation, Abby.
Yeah, I am thrilled to have you on as well. As people might have guessed from your bio, we will be talking about the organic side of things today, specifically issues that can face farmers in corn. So I would love if you could start us off by just explaining some of the difficulties organic farmers face with this, and maybe some of the things that you are hoping to bring over from a different crop into corn systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the real primary challenges in organic agriculture is, of course, weed management. Due to the USDA National Organic Program prohibits the use of any kind of synthetic chemicals, and so this includes herbicides, but also includes things like synthetic nutrients as well. So a lot of our soluble fertilizers, things like urea or ammonium sulfate, wouldn't be allowable in an organic setting. And so farmers have to use different strategies and generally rely on ecological strategies to try to control weeds and to provide nutrients to their crop. And for most organic farmers, I think this makes things certainly more challenging, but I think most of them would tell you it makes farming a lot more fun as well, because you have to really have a good understanding of the full system and know how to pull on different levers to achieve the different results that you want to achieve. And so one of the primary methods that organic farmers use to control weeds and to manage fertility in their systems is tillage. And tillage has, of course, a lot of really good usefulness to it from a weed control perspective, but there's also risks to tillage as well, and certainly soil erosion is one of those risks that we see when we overuse tillage in organic systems. And so a big part of our research program is trying to understand how can we minimize the amount of tillage that we're using in these organic systems, and how can we use it really judiciously when we do use it. And so we look at a lot of these different ecological practices to try to control weeds in ways that don't require tillage. And so in integrated weed management, one of the analogies that is commonly used, and I'll use it again today because it's a good one, is this analogy of having a toolbox of a bunch of different hammers that you use. And this was initially coined by a scientist named Matt Liebman, who wrote about this in a publication he had on ecological strategies to manage weeds. And essentially what this is saying is we can have these really big tools, things like herbicides or things like tillage, that have a lot of utility and do a lot in that one action. But with that, there's always risks. And so, of course, with herbicides, the risk is having herbicide resistance come into the system. And with tillage, it's things like damaging soil health and potentially losses towards soil erosion as well. And so we like to look at other strategies, things like managing our seeding densities of our crops to have more crop and weed competition, things such as crop rotations, where we can kind of disrupt the cycle of weeds. And the big one that we use in our research program is cover crops as well.
Sure. And there has been some success in soybean with this. So, can you talk a little bit about kind of some of the successes that have been seen in soybean and kind of what it's not just like we'll just start doing this in corn. So if you could
Mhm.
talk about like why you can't just do that and what makes corn unique or some of the challenges that are unique to corn in incorporating some of those strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've started in our research program experimenting with this idea of reducing tillage in organics with a soybean system. And soybeans have a lot of advantages to trying to reduce tillage. They're a very forgiving crop in a lot of ways. And where we've seen success is taking a winter rye cover crop that we plant in the fall, allow that to overwinter, and then that cover crop puts on a bunch of growth early in the spring, and we come back at a specific point in the growth stage of that cover crop, particularly when it's starting to flower, and then we use a roller crimper to terminate that cover crop. And so essentially what a roller crimper is it's a large cylindrical drum that has these beveled crimping units on it, and so it flattens down that cover crop and also kind of crushes the vascular tissue of that cover crop to terminate it over the course of about a week or so. And what you end up with is really a pretty dense mulch that's in the field. So if you think about putting a mulch down in your garden or something like that, it has very much the same effect. And so that physical layer of that cover crop covering the soil really can help prevent weeds from emerging. And so in our organic systems, we've seen a lot of success with this from the standpoint of being able to dramatically reduce our weed potential without doing any kind of tillage, and also having very competitive yields with our soybeans at the end of the season compared to more of our standard traditional cultivated type soybean systems. And the issue then with trying to transfer this into other crops such as corn is a much less forgiving crop. So it's much more demanding in terms of its nutrient needs, particularly with nitrogen. And a cover crop like rye is going to take up a lot of that nitrogen in the soil and not provide it back within the time frame that the corn needs it. And so there are some strategies that people have used to try to eliminate tillage or reduce it in these organic systems with corn. And one of those is using a leguminous cover crop such as hairy vetch and growing that very much in a similar way as winter rye, where you plant it in the fall, allow it to overwinter, and then come springtime, you use a roller crimper to terminate that. And the big advantage with hairy vetch is it can supply nitrogen actually back to the soil. And as that material breaks down, it can release a lot of nitrogen-rich materials back that the corn is able to make use of. However, with that, there's always advantages and disadvantages and trade-offs that we need to manage with these systems. And a couple of the major trade-offs are it forces our corn planting dates pretty late into the season. So to be effective with a roller crimper, you have to wait for a very specific stage in its life cycle, which is when it's at its flowering stage. And for hairy vetch, that occurs around the middle of June to the end of June. And this is about a month after we would want to be out there planting corn. And so while it can be really successful, we definitely do lose a fair amount of yield potential just from delaying that planting date so much. Another issue with it is the hairy vetch, if you don't effectively terminate it completely, it can produce seed, and that seed has a nature called hard-seededness, which basically means that not all of that seed is going to germinate at the same time the next year. And so some of that might persist for multiple years down the line, and it makes it really, really hard to manage in future years, and you'll often have hairy vetch growth coming back in your field. And that's something that scares farmers a little bit from this as well, is that hairy vetch can actually turn into a weed in the future. And so we've been kind of exploring some alternative methods to this, understanding that there's a lot of utility to this hairy vetch system, and it fits for some farmers, but we also wanted to explore some alternative options for other farmers, and that's where this concept of a living mulch comes into play. And so basically, a living mulch is another strategy that we can have to reduce tillage that has a different set of trade-offs that we get to deal with in that system.
Great. Yeah, no silver bullets in farming ever.
Hmm.
But that's kind of, I mean, like you mentioned, that's kind of where the fun comes in, is getting that deep knowledge through trial and error and uh, the progression of these scientific experiments. So, I would love to learn more then about the specific goals of the research topic of this paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the living mulch system, it's a fun system in the sense that it is challenging in the sense that we're dealing with two crops at the same time. So we're trying to manage both our corn crop and our living mulch and the dynamics that are happening between them. And so there's definitely the potential for competition between our cash crop or our corn in this case and that living mulch, which is our red clover in the case of our experiments. And so the gist of our research experiment and what we're trying to explore more is how can we better manage the competition and the dynamics between these two crops to try to promote as much as we can the production and the growth of our corn while still allowing that living mulch to do what it needs to do, which in our case, an organic system, is to suppress weeds.
Sure. And you had three kind of strategies that you were testing out. So I would love to know about those.
Yeah, so I'll maybe take a step back and just explain a little bit the progression of the system and how we go about managing it, and then kind of jump into what those different treatment strategies were. So for the system, what we do is we plant a red clover cover crop in the fall. So typically we'll have a winter wheat crop that gets harvested the year before. We come in, we plant this red clover around the end of August or early September. That red clover then goes through the winter. It puts on some growth very slowly initially and establishes itself and then overwinters. And then early in the spring, in April and May, it starts to accumulate quite a bit of growth pretty fast. And what we do at that point is we do some management prior to planting our corn. And so this is one of the experimental treatments that we wanted to look at, was pre-plant management of this. And so we compared doing strip tillage in one of our sets of treatments versus just planting corn directly into that living mulch as it was. Then after planting it, we wanted to explore different strategies to try to manage the dynamics of competition that are going on between these two crops. And so another set of treatments that we looked at was flaming, using a flame weeder, which for those who maybe aren't familiar with what a flame weeder is, it's basically you have a propane tank on the back of your tractor. It attaches to these different nozzles that when you ignite them produces a jet of flame. And it's a pretty common tool in organic weed management and is very effective at killing weeds that are pretty small and early in their growth stage. And so with this, we weren't necessarily expecting the flame to kill our living mulch, and we didn't want to do that because we wanted the living mulch to persist. But what we were interested in is sublethal suppression of that living mulch. So basically what that means is, can we use different management strategies to knock back the growth of that cover crop and allow the corn to express itself a little bit more and not be under quite as much competition early on in the growing season. And this is a strategy that often gets used in conventional management systems with living mulches as well, where they'll use herbicides to do essentially the same thing, to knock back the growth and the competitiveness of that living mulch and allow the corn to kind of express itself a little bit more. But within these organic systems, what we are really interested in is can we do kind of the same thing, but using mechanical strategies where we're not using chemical strategies. And so we compared doing a flame weeding pass shortly after planting to try to, again, knock back that clover growth a little bit more. And then we also, a little bit later in the season, explored some different in-season management strategies. And so what this looked like is we used a novel tool called an inter-row roller crimper. And so some of you might be familiar with standard roller crimpers, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and how they get used in our soybean systems. And basically what the inter-row roller crimper does is it has these smaller crimping units that only pass between the rows of corn and leave the rows of corn untouched. And so the strategy behind this was for sublethal suppression. We wanted to try to knock back as much as we could that clover growth and see if we could help that corn to come along a little bit more early in the growing season. And so we did a roller crimping pass both 2 weeks and 1 month after planting the corn. Another strategy we used in season was a high residue cultivator. And so essentially what this tool is it's much like a standard cultivator that you would use in a cultivated tillage-based organic system, but it's meant for more these scenarios where you have a lot of residue in the field. And the objective here was to do it a month after planting and to actually terminate that clover to see if we could allow that clover to grow and be useful as a living mulch and suppress weeds for the first part of the season. But then if we terminate it later in the season, would we be able to still get good weed suppression and hopefully reduce that competitive nature between the two crops? And then our final set of treatments was a combination of those two, where we did a roller crimping pass 2 weeks after planting to try to reduce that competitiveness, and then terminated completely the living mulch with a high residue cultivator later in the season.
What can you remind me when the flame weeder was in relation to planting? So
the flame weeder happened immediately after planting. So we went through, planted, and then the next day came back with a flame weeder.
Okay, I was wondering what, like, the between that and the roller crimper, and I was like, well, if there's nothing to crimp, I guess, without just straight up killing it, that totally makes sense. How tall is the corn at this point when you're like a month in?
Right. Yeah, so the corn is, I would say, about knee high, maybe slightly larger, once we're a month into the season. So that's another good point, though, because if we wait too long and we try to bring some of these tools out there, it can actually damage the corn crop because it bends it over and breaks it. And so we want to be out there early enough in the season that we can use these tools. And also with corn, if we can reduce that competitiveness, especially early in the season when the corn needs a lot more help to kind of get going, is really critical to trying to maintain that yield potential. Once the corn gets some height to it, it's able to actually shade out some of that clover on its own and kind of stand on its own 2 feet a little bit better.
Sure. Yeah, when you were talking about delaying it for the hairy vetch earlier, you're like, oh, it's in July. And I was like, it's supposed to be knee-high in July. Everybody knows the phrase. Yep. So I figured it would be about knee-high based on what you'd said earlier. But I imagine that there's like a bit of a danger if there's, maybe in May and July in Wisconsin, that's not as big of a deal. But if you can't get out into the field to do these things because of weather or rain or whatever, I imagine then, I mean, how much of a risk is that? Is it going to like really damage your yields if you don't suppress it? Or is that kind of, I mean, I suppose that's kind of what you were getting at with the whole experiment.
Yeah. I would say some of these management activities are a little bit forgiving in when you can do them. They don't need to happen exactly on a certain day. So there's a certain amount of being able to work around the weather conditions that we have. That being said, some years it has been really, really challenging to do this kind of stuff in a timely manner. A couple of years ago, we had, I think, about 2 straight weeks where it seemed to rain every single day. And so we had to push off a lot of our management to later in the season than we would typically like to. And so that certainly did have some effect on our yield as well. But for the most part, things like going back with the roller crimping, we want to be relatively timely in when those happen. But if it has to wait 3 or 4 days to wait for field conditions to dry up and for us to be able to get out there, it's usually okay.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Ben's paper, Mechanical Management Strategies Improve Corn Production and Organically Managed Living Mulch Systems, published in Agronomy Journal, is always freely available. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Let's get back to the show. That is a great overview of the different treatments. We should also discuss kind of how you were, like what measurements you were taking to see how effective these were.
Yeah. So one of the primary measurements we took was red clover growth at various different points throughout the season. And so we really wanted to measure this to understand whether these different management practices we were doing were actually successful at reducing the amount of clover growth that was there, because that's kind of what's behind this idea of sublethal termination, is we want to reduce the amount of growth and reduce the competitiveness of it. Then the other key thing we wanted to know was how it affected weed biomass. And so we went back at the end of the season, did some clippings for weed biomass to see if these different management strategies were successful in the amount of control or suppression of the weeds. And then we took a couple measurements of the corn as well. So first off was corn populations. One of the big risks for these mechanical management strategies, so mechanical management, essentially you're using steel out in the field instead of chemicals. And so there's always the potential that you damage your crop to some extent from doing that. So the roller crimper, you might roll over some plants of corn and damage your plant stands. Similar concept with the high residue cultivator. It can be easy to clip some of those corn plants as well. And so we wanted to understand what the risk of these different management strategies were in maintaining corn populations. And then the final measurement we took at the end of the season was just our yield of the crop as well. We wanted to understand, with all these different dynamics going on, what is working well and what's not working well with the actual production of the crop at the end of the season.
Sure. For the biomass measurements for the weeds, I guess corn is easy because it's quite tall. So it's fairly easy to be like, that is just the corn. But I imagine with weeds and the clover that are all a little bit closer together on the ground, how do you, is it, I don't really want to say the yield of the weed, I suppose, but how are you measuring that as a separate thing from red clover biomass?
Sure, yeah. So basically what we did is we took kind of a square of a known area and threw that out into the plot. And then it was a lot of subdividing. So picking apart the red clover, identifying the weeds, and putting them into a separate bag. And so, yeah, we really wanted to understand what our biomass of the clover was and what our biomass of the weeds were, and to see if more biomass of the clover was meaning we were getting more weed suppression, or if we were being successful in reducing the amount of biomass of our clover through these management, was that actually resulting in more weeds that might be damaging to the crop yield in a different way. It's not part of the red clover, but now is allowing more biomass of other species to come through. And so it was, yeah, a lot of hand sorting in the field to try to figure that out.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was where you would wind up on that. Well, that is a great overview of kind of the different treatments you were looking at. So what did you find?
Yeah, so I'll kind of summarize this into a few different key points. So the first thing that we found is that regardless of whatever management strategy we did, the corn yields were still relatively low as compared to our standard cultivated corn systems. And this wasn't terribly surprising to us. Most of the research that's been conducted on these living mulch systems have shown similar kind of trends, where there is some level of yield gap between these living mulch systems and the more standard management systems. But there were a few things that we learned that did help. And one of probably the largest lever that we could pull was performing strip tillage before we planted it. And so creating those planting strips to plant the corn into, where we had freshly tilled soil and less competition from that living mulch growing directly into the row, we did see some pretty substantial improvements in yield, upwards of 50% or more. And so that was encouraging to see that as kind of a baseline that practice is important for the system to be successful. From the mechanical management standpoint, we did observe that some of our strategies were successful in doing what we wanted them to do. So essentially reducing the amount of clover biomass and improving our yields at the end of the season. And so flaming was actually one of those that happened to reduce the clover growth at various points in the season. And then we did see a relatively subtle but statistically significant benefit to using that flame weeding throughout the season. And then the final thing that we learned that was really important for us and has also kind of helped drive the direction of how we do this research nowadays is we saw that being able to control the clover that was kind of creeping into the corn rows was really critical as well. So if we had a lot of clover that was coming through in the corn row, either because we weren't able to terminate it well with a strip tiller or just because of kind of the growth habits of the clover, it kind of falling into and taking root and growing within that corn row, we saw a lot of damage to our corn yield from there. And so that kind of emphasizes, again, this need for continuous maintenance and management of that clover strip throughout the season to keep its growth low and to prevent it from really competing with the corn. Regarding yield gaps with the corn, one of the things, if I can just kind of speak philosophically for a moment about this, is there does seem to be kind of this dichotomy between producing high yielding crops with also getting benefits of ecosystem services. And so at one end, if you tend to push on the producing really, really high yielding crops, you tend to lose out on some of the more ecosystem services side of things. And so these would be things like water regulation, nutrient cycling, carbon storage, habitat for diversity out in those ecosystems. And then on the other side, if we start to really emphasize producing these ecosystem services, it tends to do so at the expense of some of our crop yields. And so what we're really interested in doing with this research project and even more broadly within the research program is trying to find ways to build multifunctional systems. So systems that are able to perform a lot of functions at the same time, including producing really high yielding crops, but also still doing a really good job at providing those ecosystem benefits that we're looking for.
That's some great results to get you started. Obviously, I know you said there's still like some gaps to make up with the yield and some different potential issues you can have taking steel out into a field of plants at any time. So what future research is on the horizon? Where are we going to keep this train rolling?
Yeah, so this research project that we're discussing here is kind of the first step of several that we've kind of initiated to try to figure out this balance again between corn production and getting some of these benefits of the living mulch system. And so one of the key findings for this research project was, again, being able to suppress the clover growth throughout the season. And one of the newer tools that we've been using has been a inter-row mower tool. And so basically what this is you have these rotary mowers, individual rotary mower units that are kind of contained in boxes, and those can travel between the rows of corn and mow down the clover at various points in the season. And we've been really successful with that. And so that's been exciting to see as another new tool that's showing potential for improvements in yields. In terms of future research, I think there's a lot of things still to discover and to learn. One of the key things is understanding what kind of clover species are the best for this kind of system. So for us in the organic systems, we've typically used red clover. White clover is another option that farmers have expressed interest in. We've also seen a lot of success using yellow blossom sweet clover, and the benefit to that one is it's a single cut species of clover. And so what that means is after a couple mowing events of it, it'll actually terminate that clover entirely, whereas red clover continues to persist and grow no matter how many times you mow it, it'll continue to come back. And so that's been another strategy that's been exciting for us and successful for us to try to, again, reduce that competition between the species. But there's still a lot of questions out there about when are the best times to do these management events, and which ones are the most effective still. And so there's a lot of rich room to continue seeking these questions for this kind of system. Another area that's exciting that we've been looking into is with corn genetics on these kind of systems. And so a lot of our corn varieties have been bred for very kind of perfect conditions without any kind of competition from other crops. But looking at other particularly older varieties that are out there, they can flourish a little bit better under conditions of more stress. And so we're just starting in some of our research to explore different varieties of corn in these systems. And some of our older varieties of corn, even open pollinated varieties of corn, have been able to perform without yield gaps compared to our more standard tillage-based systems. And so I think there's a huge potential for crop breeding in this system too, to create varieties of corn that are really suitable for these kind of systems.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Exciting stuff. The inter-row mowers, are we talking like Roomba mower where you just set it loose, or are they like connected to, like in the same way that your roller crimpers would be like attached to a thing?
Right, so both options exist. There are robotic mowers, which are more the Roomba style mowers that you program kind of a route into them, and they go up and down the field just on their own. The ones we're using are attached to a tractor. And so there's kind of a toolbar on the front of the tractor, and then these individual mower units hang off on the front of the tractor at various different spacings. And then you just drive through the field, and those mowers mow down the area between the row and then leave the crop within the row growing.
Fantastic. Love that. Love some good farm equipment. I'm always impressed by just how many different things you can attach to those things. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. So I have 3 questions left for you. The first one is, if people want to learn more about any of the things we've talked about today, where can they go?
One place I would direct people to go is the OGRAIN, which is the Organic Grain and Resource and Information Network, which is kind of like the extension side of our research program. And there's a lot of really fantastic information related to these kind of topics that we're talking about today, but also just more broadly related to organic agriculture and management and issues that occur in organic agriculture, and a lot of great resources, a lot of great videos. There's a fantastic listserv for farmers if you're interested in joining the conversation on this and being able to ask questions to other farmers and get response back from other farmers. That's a fantastic place to start as well. Another area I would encourage people to go to is the Ryan Lab at Cornell. Has a bunch of really fantastic resources, and they've been great collaborators on a lot of these projects as well. And they would have fantastic resources related to organic agriculture and sustainability.
Fantastic. If listeners that want to take the next step and get involved with any of the things we've talked about today, where can they go?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you're a farmer and you're interested in trying some of these practices, you can certainly reach out to us and we'd be happy to work with you on this. I would encourage farmers to start small and try some of these different practices on their farm, see what things work, what things don't work. One of the really wonderful things about doing extension-related agriculture research is kind of the two-way street of communication between farmers and researchers. And we've got a bunch of really fantastic ideas from farmers, and we're always really excited to hear some of what those ideas are. And those have certainly been incorporated into our research program and the way that we do research. And so very happy to get ideas from other farmers or others who are interested in exploring these kind of topics. If you're not a farmer or not a researcher and are just interested in some of these concepts, I think a great way to get involved with this is within your home garden. I'm someone who likes to garden quite a bit and really enjoy using some of these practices that we use at scale in our more commodity crop systems out on the research farm and bringing them back to something really small scale that I can quite easily put my hands on. And this living mulch is really a great way to do that. And within a kind of a garden kind of setting, it's amazing. You'll be able to see the abundance of biodiversity that's in these systems by having these different crops growing side by side, and is another way to also play around with different management strategies to see what works well. Maybe you can take a mower out there and mow down those rows of living mulches and play around with timing of things and different management strategies to kind of explore some of these topics that we've been talking about today as well. And then finally, I would say if you're someone who values this kind of style of agricultural management and believes in the benefits that it has from an environmental standpoint and from the benefits on the farm, I would encourage you to produce or to buy organic products, certified organic products. And by doing that, that really promotes the industry of organic agriculture and helps the farmers out who are doing these kind of practices.
Yeah, totally. That's great advice for anyone looking to get involved. Final question then. What is one fun fact that listeners wouldn't know about you if all they had was your research?
Yeah, so this year, the big thing in my life was I got married about 3 weeks ago, and so it was a lot of fun to prepare for the wedding, also a lot of work, but it was a great time being able to just celebrate with all the people that we love and have a good party at the end of the day, and have been enjoying married life now for about 3 weeks.
Oh, congratulations! That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, here's to many, many years full of fantastic research and a joyous marriage and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for being on the show today and joining me for this conversation and for all the work that you have yet to do.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.